She didn't scream. She didn't run. Hannah Brooks simply froze, her fork suspended midair, her breath completely gone, as the most powerful man she had ever known leaned across a candlelit table 60 floors above Manhattan and whispered 4 words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her life. "I want a child." And then, after a pause that lasted a lifetime, "And I want you to be the mother." She was 31 years old. She had never been with a man, and the only thing standing between her quiet, faithful life in Springdale and something she could never take back was whatever she said next. What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit that bell. You do not want to miss where this one goes. The night it happened, Hannah Brooks was already running late. She had changed her outfit 3 times, which was unusual for a woman who owned exactly 4 pairs of shoes and considered a blazer. Dressed up. She had stood in front of her bathroom mirror longer than she'd like to admit, studying the face, looking back at her plain brown hair. Careful eyes, the faint line between her brows that came from years of grading papers, and worrying about other people's children. She told herself she was nervous, because Manhattan always made her nervous. The noise, the pace, the way people moved, like they had somewhere more important to be than wherever they currently were. She told herself it had nothing to do with him. She was mostly lying. Adrian Cole had called her 2 weeks earlier, not texted called, which was already unusual enough to make her sit down. Adrian texted. Adrian sent brief, efficient messages at odd hours that said things like, "You still alive?" or "Read this article," with a link attached. He did not call. He had not called in almost 3 years. When she saw his name on her screen, her first thought was that something was wrong. Hannah. Just her name. But the way he said it quietly, carefully, like he was carrying something fragile, made the hair on her arm stand up. Adrian. What's going on? I need to see you. A pause. In person. Can you come to New York this weekend? She had looked around her small apartment in Springdale, the stack of ungraded spelling tests on the kitchen table, the half-finished cup of chamomile tea going cold beside them, the potted plant on the windowsill she'd been nursing back to life for 2 months. Everything small, everything familiar, everything safe. This weekend, she repeated. Adrian, I'll send a car. I'll cover everything. Just please. I need to talk to you. She said yes. Of course she said yes. She always said yes to Adrian Cole, and she had spent most of her adult life pretending that wasn't a complicated fact. They had known each other since they were 7 years old. That was the part people never understood when they tried to make sense of the two of them, because on paper Adrian Cole and Hannah Brooks made no sense at all. He was on the cover of Forbes at 34. He had built 2 technology companies from nothing, and sold one of them for enough money that the number still made Hannah vaguely dizzy when she thought about it. He lived in a glass tower above Central Park, flew on private planes, and had the kind of effortless confidence that came not from arrogance, but from having survived things most people never had to. Hannah taught 2nd grade. She lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment she'd rented for 6 years. She drove a 10-year-old Honda and attended the same church her mother had attended before her. They had nothing in common, except they had everything in common in all the ways that actually mattered. They'd grown up 3 streets apart in a smaller town than Springdale, back when they were both young enough that wealth and status meant nothing, and the only currency was whether you showed up when it counted. Adrian had shown up for Hannah the day her father left, sitting on her porch steps without being asked, not saying a word, just being there. Hannah had shown up for Adrian the night his mother was taken to the hospital, and he had no one else to call. They had carried each other through things neither of them talked about with anyone else, and somewhere along the way, without ceremony, without anyone declaring it, they had become the kind of friends who are less like friends and more like a fixed point. Like north on a compass. Like something you rely on without fully understanding why. The restaurant was not what she expected. She had prepared herself for somewhere intimidating chrome and glass a dress code. She would inevitably violate waitstaff, who looked at her sensible flats and quietly judged her. She had worn her best dress anyway, navy blue simple, the one she kept for weddings and funerals, and moments when she needed to feel like she could hold her ground. Instead, the address led her to a small Italian place in the West Village, the kind with mismatched candles on the tables, and handwritten menus, and the smell of garlic and good wine that reaches you before you're even through the door. Adrian was already there. He stood when he saw her, a habit he'd had since they were teenagers that she used to tease him about mercilessly, and for a moment she just looked at him. He was wearing a gray button-down no-tie sleeves, rolled to the elbows. He looked tired. Not the surface-level tired of someone who'd had a long week, but something deeper. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. You look good," he said. "You look terrible," she said. He laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded. And just like that, the 3 years of distance between them collapsed, like it had never been there at all. They ordered wine she barely touched, and pasta she barely ate, and talked for almost 2 hours, the way they had always talked, easily, honestly, like two people who had long since given up performing for each other. He asked about her students. She told him about Marcus, the 7-year-old in the 3rd row who had just started reading chapter books on his own, and came in early every morning to tell her about them. He asked about her mother. She asked about his company, his travels, the things he'd done in the 3 years since they'd last sat across from each other. And then, somewhere near the end of the second glass of wine, a silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not empty. The kind of silence that means something is coming. Hannah set down her fork. "Adrian!" She said his name the way she always did when she knew he was circling something. "What did you actually bring me here to say?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at the table, turned his wine glass slowly between both hands, a gesture she recognized, the one that meant he was choosing words carefully, the one that meant what came next mattered. Then he looked up, and he leaned forward, and he said it, quietly, just above a whisper, like the words themselves were fragile. "I want a child, Hannah, and I want you to be the mother." The candle between them didn't move. The restaurant kept going, silverware low conversation, someone laughing at the table behind them. The whole world kept moving at exactly the same pace. Hannah did not move at all. She wasn't sure how long she sat there. 5 seconds. 20. Long enough for Adrian's expression to shift from carefully controlled to something rawer. Something that looked almost like fear. Say something," he added quietly. She stopped. Tried again. "Adrian, I know. Do you—" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Do you know what you just said to me?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "I've been thinking about it for a long time." She pushed her chair back slightly. Not to leave, just to breathe, just to create 1 more inch of space between herself and whatever this moment was. You can't say something like that, and then sit there calmly like you asked me to pass the bread." "I'm not calm." The honesty in his voice stopped her. "I haven't been calm since I picked up the phone to call you." Hannah looked at him, really looked at him the way she rarely let herself, and saw what she'd missed when she first walked in. Not just tired. Hollow, like someone who had built everything the world told him to want, and had recently quietly realized it wasn't enough. "Talk to me," she said. "Start from the beginning." He was quiet for a moment. Then he did. The short version was this. Adrian wanted a child. He had wanted one for years, quietly, privately, in the way that men like him were not supposed to admit to wanting things they couldn't acquire through strategy and effort. He had been in one serious relationship, a woman named Claire, smart and elegant, and wholly incompatible with him in every way that mattered. And it had ended 2 years ago, without resolution, without children, without much of anything except a mutual recognition that they had been performing a version of a relationship neither of them actually wanted. Since then, he'd had nothing. Not nothing as in no dates, no company. Nothing as in no one. No person he trusted. No person he could be honest with. Except Hannah. who he had been honest with in some form or another for 24 years. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said. "I'm not asking you to give up your life or your job or any piece of who you are. I'm asking if you would, with everything considered, with everything respected, consider being the mother of my child." He had laid out the rest carefully, quietly, in the manner of a man who had rehearsed this, and was aware that rehearsing it had not made it any less audacious. Medical assistance, full support, every decision shared, every promise kept. She would have complete autonomy. He would never ask her for anything she wasn't willing to give. Hannah listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "And what made you think I would say yes to this?" He didn't hesitate. "I didn't." "Then why ask?" "Because," he said, "you're the only person in my life I've ever told the complete truth to. And I couldn't start lying to myself now." She didn't answer him that night. She thanked him for dinner. She let him walk her to the car he'd arranged. She said she needed time. He said, "Of course, no pressure, no deadline, take whatever time she needed." And then the car pulled away from the curb, and Hannah sat in the back seat, watching the city blur past the window, and she thought about the look on his face when she'd walked through that restaurant door. The way something in him had shifted, just slightly, just barely, like a man who had been bracing for disappointment, and hadn't yet let himself believe it wasn't coming. She thought about the summer she was 12 years old, and her father left, and Adrian had sat on her porch steps for 4 hours without being asked. She thought about the letter he'd sent her when she was 23, the one she still had tucked in the back of her bedside drawer, written on actual paper in his cramped, careful handwriting. "I know you're doubting yourself right now. Stop it. You're going to be an extraordinary teacher. I have never been wrong about you." She thought about what it meant that in 31 years of living, the person she trusted most in this world was the one who had just asked her the most impossible question she'd ever been asked. And she thought, is this crazy? Or have I just been too cautious my whole life to recognize what things are actually worth? She didn't sleep on the flight home. She drove back to Springdale in the gray pre-dawn quiet, parked in her usual spot, climbed the stairs to her apartment, and sat at her kitchen table until the sun came up. The spelling tests were still there. The plant on the windowsill was still leaning slightly toward the glass. Everything exactly where she'd left it. She made coffee. She sat with it. She prayed not in the formal way, but in the quiet, honest way she'd prayed since she was a girl. "I don't know what the right thing is. I don't know what this means. But I don't want to choose out of fear. Help me choose out of faith." Then she picked up her phone. He didn't text. She called. He answered on the second ring. It was barely 6 in the morning. She knew he hadn't slept either. "Hannah, I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer me honestly." "I always answer you honestly." "I know. That's why I'm asking." She took a breath. "Adrian, do you have feelings for me? Not as a co-parent. Not as someone you trust. Do you have feelings for me?" A pause, long enough that her heart started to move faster. "That's not a simple question," he said. "I know. Answer it anyway." Another pause, and then, quietly, carefully, the way he'd spoken in the restaurant, like the words were made of something breakable. "I have always had feelings for you, Hannah. I've just never let myself look at them directly. Because you were the one thing in my life I couldn't afford to lose. And some part of me always believed that if I said it out loud, I would." She closed her eyes. Outside her window, Springdale was waking up. A car passed. A dog barked twice and went quiet. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I'm not saying yes to the other thing. Not yet. But I'm saying okay. I hear you. And I'm not running." She could hear him exhale, slow, controlled the breath of a man who had been holding something too tightly for a very long time. "That's enough," he said softly. "For now, that's more than enough." The days that followed were quiet ones. She taught her classes. She graded her papers. She sat with it the way she sat with everything important, letting it settle into her, letting herself understand the shape of it. She called her mother, who listened carefully and said almost nothing, which was how her mother showed love. She talked to her closest friend, a woman named Dee, who taught 5th grade down the hall. and had approximately zero patience for anything she considered overthinking. Dee's response was characteristically efficient. So the man you've been in love with for 15 years finally said something. What exactly are you thinking about? I'm not in love with him, Hannah said. Dee's silence was louder than any answer. It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated, honey. That's not a reason. That's an observation.
3 weeks after that dinner in the West Village, Hannah called Adrian back. She told him she had 3 conditions. 1, complete honesty between them, always, no matter what it cost, or how uncomfortable it was. 2, if she ever felt pressured in any way about anything, she would say so, and he would listen. 3, whatever this became, between the 2 of them, beyond the arrangement in the spaces they hadn't named yet, they would handle it with the same care they had always handled each other. He agreed to all 3 before she finished saying them. And I have 1 condition of my own, he said.
Oh, what? Don't disappear on me again. Whatever happens, don't go quiet. I can handle anything except silence from you.
She felt the words land somewhere deep and quiet in her chest. Deal, she said. And just like that, carefully, honestly, with every possible reason for caution stacked against them, Hannah Brooks and Adrian Cole stepped off the edge of everything familiar. Neither of them knew yet how far down the landing was. Neither of them knew yet that falling was not the same as losing. But they were about to find out. The first appointment was on a Tuesday morning in November, and Hannah showed up 7 minutes early because she always showed up early for things that frightened her. It was a habit she'd developed as a child. Arrive before the moment arrives. Get your bearings, breathe. She was sitting in the waiting room of a quiet fertility clinic on the Upper East Side when Adrian walked through the door, and the first thing he said was, "You cut your hair." She touched the end of her ponytail, self-consciously. 2 inches. It's not dramatic. I like it. He sat down beside her. Not across from her. Beside her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. And he said it simply and without calculation, the way he said most things. Then he picked up a magazine from the side table, looked at it without reading it, and set it back down. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to have a conversation I've never had with a doctor before. That makes 2 of us. She looked at him sideways. You've never discussed this with a doctor. Not with someone I actually care about sitting next to me, no. He said it quietly, almost to himself, and she felt it settle in her chest, the way his words sometimes did gently with weight. The doctor was a calm, professional woman named Dr. Reyes, who spoke in the unhurried way of someone who understood that the people in her office were usually carrying something heavy. She explained the process. She asked questions. She used clinical language that Hannah appreciated because clinical language had no room for embarrassment. And Hannah was trying very hard not to be embarrassed about the fact that she was 31 years old and had to answer no to questions that most women her age would answer differently. At one point, Dr. Reyes asked gently if Hannah had any concerns about the process given her personal history. Hannah said, I want to understand everything before I agree to anything. Dr. Reyes said, of course. Adrian said nothing. He just turned slightly in his chair, angled toward her, and she understood without words that he was paying full attention, not to the doctor, but to her. That was the moment she knew she had made the right decision. Not because the process was simple or the road ahead was clear, but because of that small, deliberate turn. Because Adrian Cole, who built companies and spoke to rooms full of investors and operated at a pace most people couldn't match, had slowed completely down. For her, without being asked. On the way out, he held the door and she said, Thank you for coming. He looked at her like the sentence didn't make sense. Where else would I be? She didn't have an answer for that. So she just nodded and walked out into the November air and told herself the feeling in her chest was simply gratitude. She was mostly lying again, but she was getting used to it. The appointments became a rhythm. Twice a month, then more frequently as the process progressed, monitoring timing, the careful, methodical language of medicine, applied to something that felt anything but methodical. Adrian came to every single one. Not dramatically, not with gestures or speeches. He simply showed up consistently, without fail. And Hannah found that consistency more moving than anything he could have said. He waited for her. He drove her back to the hotel when she came to the city. He texted the morning after each appointment, not to ask how she was doing in the vague, performative way people asked when they didn't really want a full answer, but specific questions. Did the medication make you tired? Do you need anything? Are you eating? She told him once, half laughing. You're hovering. I prefer attentive, he said. You're hovering attentively. I'll accept that. Between appointments, she went back to Springdale and back to her classroom and back to her life, the spelling tests and the parent meetings and the small, ordinary days that had always been enough. Except they felt different now. Not smaller exactly, but slightly unanchored, like furniture that had been moved 2 inches in a familiar room. Everything the same, and nothing quite exactly where it had been. She talked to Adrian more, not just about the appointments or the practical things, but in the way they'd talked when they were young. Long phone calls that started at 9 and ended at midnight, without either of them noticing the time passing. He told her about his company, about the problems he was working through, about the board member who had started questioning his judgment in meetings. She told him about Marcus, the 7-year-old reader, who had finished his first full novel and brought it to her desk with such pride it had nearly made her cry in front of 22 second graders. You didn't cry, did you? Adrian asked. I absolutely did not. You cried. I teared up. There's a distinction. There really isn't. She laughed, the real kind, sudden and unguarded. And for a moment, the distance between Springdale and Manhattan dissolved completely. And they were just 2 people who knew each other completely and laughed easily, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Then, hang up and sit in the quiet of her apartment and feel the complicated thing she was still refusing to name. It was a Thursday evening in December when the memories really started surfacing. She'd been grading papers at her kitchen table when her phone buzzed, with a photo, no caption, just an image. She opened it and felt something move through her chest. It was a picture of an old letter folded and creased and clearly handled many times. Her own handwriting. She leaned closer and read the first line. Dear Adrian, I know you're scared about starting at the new school, but you shouldn't be because you're the smartest and bravest person I know, even though you never believe it when people say so. Oh, she was 11 years old when she wrote that. The handwriting was round and careful in the way of children trying their hardest. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she typed, Where did you find that? His response came immediately. I kept all of them. She set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again. All of them. There had been dozens of letters over the years through middle school and high school, and the long summers when his family sent him to stay with an aunt in another state. And hers kept her busy with things she didn't want to talk about. They had written to each other the way children wrote before texting, existed on paper with real pens, sending physical envelopes through actual mail. She had kept his 2 in a shoebox at the back of her closet that she hadn't opened in years. She went and opened it that night. She sat on her bedroom floor with the shoebox beside her and read letters from a boy who had been, even then, completely himself, direct and thoughtful, and sometimes achingly honest in the way children were before the world taught them to edit themselves. There was a letter from when he was 12. My mom had another bad night. I don't know why I'm telling you this, except that you're the only person I tell things to. There was one from when he was 16. After he'd gotten into the advanced math program he'd spent a whole semester working toward. I know you'll say you knew I could do it. You always say that. I'm starting to think you might actually be right. And then, near the bottom of the box, one she'd somehow forgotten. She was 16 when she received it. He was at his aunt's for the summer. 2 weeks in, he'd written her a letter that was different from the others, less careful, more urgent, like someone writing at 2 in the morning, instead of in the afternoon. It said, I think about your life differently than I think about other people's lives. Like it matters to me specifically, not just generally. I don't know exactly what that means. I think I'm still figuring it out. She had read it at 16 and not quite understood it. She had tucked it back in the box and gone on with her summer. She understood it now. She pressed her back against her bed frame and held the letter in both hands and thought, "He has been trying to tell me something for 20 years, and I have been too careful to listen." The next time she saw him, a Tuesday appointment early January, cold enough that she could see her breath in the parking garage. She got out of the car, and instead of walking toward the clinic entrance, she stopped and turned and said, "I found the shoebox." He knew exactly what she meant. She could tell by the stillness that moved through him. "And," he said, "I read the letter. The one from the summer you were 16. A pause. I remember writing that. I think you were trying to tell me something." He looked at her steadily. "I was 16. I didn't have the language for it yet." A beat. "I'm not sure I have it now either." "You don't need language," she said. "I'm just telling you I understand it now. What you meant. What you were trying to say." She took a breath. "I think I was afraid to understand it back then. It was safer to read it as just friendship." "It was friendship," he said. "That part was real." "I know. I'm saying there was also something else. And I think we've both been calling it friendship because it was easier." He was quiet for a long moment. People moved past them in the parking garage. The ordinary, oblivious movement of a city continuing around a conversation that felt like it was about everything. "What are you saying to me, Hannah?" he asked, quietly, carefully. "I'm saying I see it now. I'm not running from it." She paused. "I'm not saying I know what to do with it yet, but I see it." He nodded once, and then he said, "Okay." The same word she had used on the phone in November, simple and loaded, and meaning far more than its 2 letters. They walked into the clinic side by side, and neither of them mentioned it again that day. But something had shifted. Not dramatically, not with music or grand gestures, but in the quiet, molecular way that things shift when 2 people finally stop pretending. January became February. The process continued. Dr. Reyes was cautiously optimistic. Hannah drove the 3-hour round trip more often, and Adrian met her every time, and they developed small rituals without deciding to the coffee place on the corner, where they always stopped first, the specific route back to the hotel where she always stayed. The comfortable silence in the car that neither of them felt the need to fill. She started learning things about him she hadn't known. Not the public version. She had never been interested in the public version, but the private ones. That he couldn't sleep past 5 in the morning and use the extra hours to read. That he kept a photograph of his mother on his desk and touched the edge of the frame whenever he was on a difficult phone call. That he had taught himself to cook during the first year after Claire left. Not for any social reason, but because cooking required focus, and focus was the only thing that quieted the part of his brain that never fully stopped working. He learned things about her, too. That she was braver than she gave herself credit for, and more frightened than she let anyone see. That she had wanted to be a teacher since she was 6 years old, not because someone inspired her, but because she had been a lonely child, and her second-grade classroom had been the place she felt safest. And she had decided then that she would make that for other children. That she prayed every morning, not in a loud way, but in the quiet, committed way of someone whose faith was not performative, but structural part of the way she was built. "Do you ever doubt it?" he asked one evening. They were sitting in a small restaurant near the hotel. Not the same Italian place from the West Village, but something equally unhurried. "Your faith." "Constantly," she said. "That's not the same as losing it." "What's the difference?" She thought about it. Doubt means you're still asking questions. Losing faith means you stopped caring about the answers. He absorbed that. "I stopped believing in a lot of things after my mother died." "I know. I don't think I've replaced it with anything yet." "You don't have to have it all figured out," she said. I just think you've been looking for something to hold on to. Something that doesn't change." He looked at her across the table and said very quietly, "I know what I've been holding on to." She didn't look away. For the first time in 31 years, she didn't look away from that specific gaze, from this specific man, and she let herself feel exactly what it meant. "Adrian," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not pushing. I just needed you to know that it's there. She nodded. I know it is. It was a rainy Wednesday night in late February, when the walls between them finally fell, and it happened, the way real things always happened between them. Not dramatically, not after a fight or a grand declaration, but quietly, inevitably the way water eventually finds the lowest point in any surface. He had driven her back from the clinic, and they'd gone up to his apartment to wait out the rain because her return train wasn't for 2 hours, and there was no reason to stand in a wet station. They sat in his living room with cups of tea, going warm in their hands, talking the way they always talked. And at some point, the conversation slowed and the rain was loud against the windows, and she looked at him, and he was already looking at her. Say it, she said softly. I've been saying it for 20 years, he said. You just finally started listening. She reached across the space between them and took his hand, not dramatically, not urgently, but with the certainty of someone who had been moving toward a thing long enough to finally trust the direction. His fingers closed around hers immediately, like reflex, like something that had always known how to do this. I'm scared, she said honestly. Me too, he said. Which was not something Adrian Cole said easily, and they both knew it. What if this changes everything? Hannah. His voice was steady and low. Everything already changed. It changed the night I called you. It probably changed before that. He looked at her with the complete attention she had come to understand was the most specific thing about him, the way he could make a person feel like the only thing in the room. The question isn't whether things change. The question is whether we're brave enough to walk into it. She thought about the letters in the shoebox. She thought about 24 years of North on a Compass. She thought about a boy sitting on porch steps without being asked, and a man who drove 3 hours to sit beside her in a clinic waiting room because she needed someone who knew her completely. She thought, I have been brave about everything in my life, except the one thing that actually mattered. And then she stopped thinking. She moved forward. He met her halfway, and the rain kept falling against the windows of a Manhattan apartment, and outside the city moved at its relentless pace, and inside everything that had been quietly true for a very long time was finally allowed to be. Afterward, they sat without speaking for a while. Not the silence of people who don't know what to say, but the silence of people who have just set something down that they've been carrying too long. His arm was around her. Her head was against his shoulder. The tea had gone cold. What happens now? She asked eventually. What do you want to happen? She considered it honestly, the way she considered all serious things. I don't want to pretend this didn't happen. I would never pretend that. And I don't want to rush into a definition. I don't do well with things that move faster than I can understand them. Then we go at your pace, he said simply. Whatever that is. She tilted her head back to look at him. You really mean that? I've been waiting 24 years, he said. A little more time isn't going to break me. She laughed, quiet, warm, helpless. And he smiled, the way he rarely smiled in public. The real one that reached his eyes, the one that she was starting to understand, had always been kept primarily for her. 3 weeks later, Dr. Reyes called with the news. Hannah was in her classroom when her phone buzzed. She stepped into the hall, one eye on her students, through the narrow window in the door, and answered. Dr. Reyes spoke. Hannah listened. The hallway was fluorescent bright, and she was wearing the blue cardigan with the loose button on the third hole, and 22 second graders were working quietly on the other side of the door, and the world was absolutely ordinary in every direction. She said, Are you certain? Dr. Reyes said yes. She pressed her back against the hallway wall. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Her eyes went to the window to her classroom, to the small faces bent over their worksheets, the children she had spent years loving and teaching and protecting, doing for them the thing her own second-grade teacher had done for her. She thought, I'm going to have a child. The thought was enormous. It was terrifying. It was the most completely real thing she had ever felt. She thanked Dr. Reyes and hung up. She stood in the hallway for 30 more seconds, breathing. Then she straightened her cardigan, checked the loose button, and went back into her classroom, because 22 children needed her, and she was above all things someone who showed up. She called Adrian at 3:15 the moment the last student cleared the door. He answered on the first ring. She said, "Adrian." He said, "Tell me." She heard in those two words that he already knew not the news, but that the news was there. That this call was different. She took a breath. "We're going to have a baby," she said. The silence on his end lasted exactly 4 seconds. She counted them. And then he said her name, just her name, nothing else, in a voice she had never heard from him before. Low and wrecked, and full of something that had no other word but love. She pressed her phone against her ear and looked out her classroom window at the playground, where the after-school kids were already running and shouting and living at full volume. And she felt all at once every complicated thing she had been carrying for months resolve into something clean and simple and true. She was having a child with her best friend, the man she loved, the person who had always been her fixed point. Whatever came next, and she was not naive enough to believe nothing would come next, that the world would simply nod and let them be happy without comment, she would face it. They would face it, together, the way they had always faced everything. The joy lasted exactly 11 days before the world got involved. Hannah had kept it quiet, deliberately carefully, the way she kept everything important until she understood it fully herself. She told her mother first on a Sunday afternoon over the phone, and her mother was silent for a long moment, and then said, "Are you happy?" And Hannah said, "Yes, I really am." And her mother said, "Then that's what I needed to know." She told Dee on Monday morning before school in the parking lot, and Dee put both hands on Hannah's shoulders and looked at her with an expression that was half joy and half vindication and said, "I knew it. I knew it years ago. Hannah Brooks and you stood in that hallway and told me it was complicated." Hannah said, "It is complicated." Dee said, "And yet here you are." There was no argument available for that, so Hannah just laughed, and they walked inside. She had not planned to tell anyone else yet. She was 8 weeks along. The standard wisdom was 12, and she respected standard wisdom. She had a whole quiet plan finish, the first trimester speak, to the principal handle it professionally, step through each door as it opened. What she had not planned for was Linda Marsh. Linda Marsh taught 4th grade at Springdale Elementary and had, in Hannah's professional estimation, the most efficient rumor distribution system of any person in the Tri-County area. She was not malicious. That was the complicated part. She was simply a woman who processed the world through conversation and who seemed genuinely unable to distinguish between information that was hers to share and information that was not. Hannah had made one mistake. She had taken a phone call from Adrian in the school parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon without thinking about who else might be nearby. It was a brief call, 5 minutes, mostly logistics, the two of them discussing the next appointment and whether she should come to the city, or whether Dr. Reyes could accommodate her closer to Springdale. At some point, she had said easily without thinking, "I'm feeling fine, the nausea's mostly in the morning." She didn't see Linda until she turned around. Linda was standing 6 feet away with her car keys in her hand and an expression on her face that Hannah recognized with a cold, sinking certainty, the expression of someone who has just received a piece of information they have absolutely no intention of sitting on. "Hannah," Linda said, "is there something you want to tell us?" Hannah looked at her calmly and said, "Have a good evening, Linda," and got into her car. By Friday, the parking lot conversation had been compressed, reshaped, and redistributed throughout Springdale, in the way that small-town information always moved fast, imprecise, and with a remarkable number of additions that no one could quite account for. By the time it reached Hannah's ears through Dee, who heard it from the 3rd grade aide, who heard it from someone at the grocery store, the version in circulation was this: Hannah Brooks, the quiet elementary school teacher, was pregnant by a Manhattan billionaire she had been secretly involved with for years, and the whole arrangement was financial, and she had known all along exactly what she was doing. Hannah sat in Dee's classroom after school on Friday, with the door closed, and listened to all of it, and felt something she was not accustomed to feeling, the specific nauseating weight of being misunderstood by people who thought they understood completely. "They're calling it an arrangement," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "Some of them are," Dee said carefully. Others are just curious. But Hannah, in a town like this, I know what a town like this does with curious. Dee was quiet. I didn't do anything wrong, Hannah said, not defensively. She wasn't appealing to Dee, who already knew this. She was saying it out loud because it needed to be said out loud, because she needed to hear her own voice say it, and mean it, and believe it, against the low, persistent hum of other people's judgment. I made a choice about my life, with someone I trust completely, and it's not what they're saying it is. I know that, Dee said. The baby is real. What Adrian and I are, it's real. It's not a transaction. It has never been a transaction. I know that too. Hannah looked at her hands. Why does it feel like I have to defend it? Dee leaned forward. Because small towns are afraid of things they can't categorize. You don't fit the story they already know, so they're writing one that does. She paused. That doesn't make it true. It just makes it loud. It was louder the following Monday. Hannah walked into school and felt it immediately, the particular texture of a room that has been talking about you. The front office went slightly quiet as she passed. A parent she had spoken to comfortably for 3 years gave her a look in the hallway that lasted half a second too long. She smiled at everyone. She kept her head level. She went into her classroom and closed the door and taught her students with the same focused attention she brought every single day. Because whatever was happening in the hallway had nothing to do with the 22 children in her care, and they would not feel 1 degree of it. But after school, Principal Garner called her in. Garner was a decent man, Hannah had always believed that, and she continued to believe it even as she sat across from his desk and watched him struggle with a conversation he clearly did not want to be having. He was in his late 50s, careful, fair-minded, the kind of administrator who took his responsibility to the school community seriously. He said, Hannah, I want to be straightforward with you. She said, please. There are concerns being raised by parents about, he paused, the situation. You can say it plainly, Robert. I prefer plain. He met her eyes. There are parents asking whether your current personal circumstances are compatible with your role here. She took a breath. I'm pregnant. I'm not ill. I'm not impaired. I'm not doing anything illegal or unethical. I am having a baby, which is something teachers have done throughout the entire history of teaching. I know that. Then what exactly are these parents concerned about? He shifted in his chair. Some of them feel that the nature of the arrangement as they understand it. As they understand it, she repeated carefully. Raises questions about the example being set for students. Hannah was quiet for a moment. She looked at the framed photographs on Garner's desk. His wife, his grown children, the evidence of a life built exactly the way life was supposed to be built, according to the people, now raising questions about hers. She thought about what she wanted to say, and then said it. I have given 6 years to this school. I have never missed a day that wasn't a medical emergency. I have bought supplies out of my own pocket, stayed late. Without compensation, attended every event, advocated for every child in my classroom, to have what they needed, regardless of what it cost me personally. Her voice was level. My pregnancy does not change my ability to do this job. If parents have concerns about the example being set, I gently suggest that watching their children's teacher handle difficulty with dignity and grace is not the worst lesson they could absorb. She stood. I want to keep teaching until I'm medically unable to. I hope you'll support that. Garner looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I'll do my best. It was not the answer she wanted, but it was the honest one, and she had always respected honesty over comfort. She called Adrian on her way home. She was in the car, parked in her driveway, not ready yet to go inside, and she told him all of it. Linda Marsh, the parking lot, the rumor, the meeting with Garner, in the steady, factual voice she used when she was controlling something that wanted very much to not be controlled. When she finished, he said, Are you okay? I'm trying to be. Hannah, his voice changed. I need you to hear me right now. Are you listening? Yes. None of this is on you. You have not done anything wrong. And I am not going to let you sit in a parking lot in Springdale and carry this by yourself while I'm 4 hours away. Adrian, it's fine. I can handle. I know you can handle it, he said. And there was something in his voice that was not impatience, but urgency. The specific urgency of a man who has spent too long watching someone he loved shoulder things alone. You can handle everything. That is not the same as you having to. A pause. I'm coming this weekend. I want to talk to people. I want to stand next to you in that town and let everyone see exactly what this is. She felt something complicated move through her. Protective, almost not of herself, but of him. Adrian, you don't have to make this into a public thing. You've built your life deliberately. I don't want to pull your name into Hannah. Quiet. Final. You are carrying my child. My name is already in it, and I want it there. He let that settle. Let me come. She closed her eyes. The streetlight in her driveway had come on while they were talking. The automatic kind that triggered at dusk. And the familiar light fell through her windshield exactly the way it always did, and she thought everything is the same, and nothing is the same. And I am so tired of doing every hard thing alone. Okay, she said for the third time in their story, the word small and absolute and meaning everything. He arrived Saturday morning. He did not arrive quietly. Not because he made a production of it, but because Adrian Cole, driving a car through Springdale, Virginia, was noticed the way anything out of ordinary was noticed in a town that had not changed significantly in 20 years. Dee texted Hannah from the coffee shop on Main Street. Was that who I think it was? Hannah texted back, probably. Dee replied with 4 exclamation points and nothing else. He came to her apartment first. She opened the door, and he was standing on her small porch. With his hands in the pockets of a jacket, she recognized gray worn at the cuffs, one she'd seen him wear in photographs years ago, and he looked at her face carefully for a moment, and then stepped forward and put his arms around her before either of them said a word. She let herself be held. She was not someone who did that easily, but she was tired, and she was pregnant, and her job was uncertain, and the town she had lived in for 6 years had decided to have an opinion about her life. And the man holding her had driven 4 hours on a Saturday morning because she needed him to. She let herself be held. I made coffee, she said eventually into his shoulder. I saw the light on, he said. I knew you'd been up for hours. 3. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. She pulled back and looked at him. He looked back. There was a seriousness between them that was not heavy, more like the seriousness of two people who have chosen each other and are standing in the full weight of that choice and are not flinching. What's the plan? She asked. Church tomorrow, he said simply. She blinked. Adrian, you go every Sunday. I want to come with you. He held her gaze. Not as a statement, not as a performance. Because it's where you go, and I want to be where you are. But if people see if the town sees what this actually looks like, you think that changes their minds? I think it makes them look at something real, instead of a story they invented. A pause. You always told me truth was stronger than rumor. You told me that when I was 16 and someone at school was saying things about my mother. She was quiet. She remembered saying that. She remembered the letter he'd written back. You're right. You're annoyingly right. Church, she said finally. Church, he confirmed. They will absolutely stare at you. I've been stared at by venture capitalists who wanted to take my company. I'll survive a Sunday service in Springdale. She laughed despite herself. He smiled, the real one, the one she kept. Sunday morning, Adrian Cole walked into Springdale Baptist Church beside Hannah Brooks. And the quiet that moved through the congregation when they entered was the kind that had texture. People turned. Eyes tracked them to the third pew from the front, which was where Hannah always sat, which was where she sat now with Adrian beside her, his shoulder against hers holding a hymnal he had clearly never opened before in his life, and studying it with the focused attention of a man determined to be present and correct. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, and tried to find the right page, and felt an absurd wave of tenderness. After the service, he introduced himself to people, not in the practiced, strategic way of a man working a room, in the direct, unhurried way that was simply how he was. He shook hands with the elderly deacon who had known Hannah's mother. He spoke to the young couple with twin boys in Hannah's class, who had been polite to her face, and concerned behind her back. He did not explain himself. He did not apologize. He simply spoke to people like a man who had nothing to hide and every reason to be there, which was, Hannah realized, exactly true. She watched the couple with the twins. She watched their faces as they talked to him, the way the calculation moved across their expressions, the slow recalibration of story. This was not what they had imagined. This was not what rumor had described. On the drive home, she said, "That was good." Was it the twins' parents? I could see them adjusting their whole narrative in real time. People aren't usually bad, he said. They're usually just working with incomplete information. She looked at him. When did you get wise? I learned from someone who's been saying it her whole life, he said, and glanced at her, and she turned to look out the window so he wouldn't see her face. The following week, he did something she had not anticipated. He was in an interview, a quarterly conversation with a technology reporter he'd spoken to for years, the kind of public-facing exchange that had nothing to do with his personal life. She found out about it afterward, the way everyone found out about it. A short video clip posted to a business news channel 30 seconds long, which, by Monday, had been shared 60,000 times. The reporter had asked as a closing question whether there was anything in his personal life that had been shaping his thinking recently. A throwaway question, the kind designed to get a humanizing quote for the end of the piece. Adrian had looked directly into the camera and said, "I'm going to be a father. The woman I love is carrying our child, and she is handling the weight of that in a small town where people have been less than kind about something they don't fully understand." He paused. "I spent 15 years building companies because I believed that if you build the right things, they stand for something. I believe the same is true of families. I didn't build companies to impress the world. I built them so I could recognize what truly matters, and she is what matters." Hannah watched the clip 3 times. Then she sat at her kitchen table and pressed her palms flat on the surface and breathed. Her phone started going. D first, oh my God. Then her mother. Then 3 numbers she didn't recognize. Then a message from a parent in her class that said simply, "We owe you an apology." She didn't call Adrian immediately. She needed to absorb it first. She needed to understand what he had done and why and what it meant, and how she felt about it, because Hannah Brooks did not respond to large things until she had sat with them long enough to understand their shape. What he had done was this. He had stood up, not defensively, not angrily. He had not attacked the rumors or demanded corrections or threatened anyone. He had simply spoken the truth plainly and publicly in his own voice and let it land wherever it was going to land. She is what matters. 5 words, on camera, in front of an audience of whoever watched business news, which apparently included 60,000 people who had opinions about it. She called him that evening. He answered and said, "I should have told you. I was going to do that. I'm sorry." "Why didn't you?" "Because I wasn't sure I was going to do it until I was already doing it." A pause. "Are you angry?" She thought about it honestly. "No, She searched for the right word. "Overwhelmed." Good overwhelmed or bad? She thought about the parent's message. "We owe you an apology." She thought about Garner, who had called her on her lunch break and said the parent complaints had, as of this morning, stopped. She thought about what it felt like to have someone refuse to let you be alone in a hard thing, not because they felt obligated, but because they had chosen you specifically and completely in front of anyone who cared to look. Good, she said. Overwhelmed good. A beat. You called me the woman you love. A pause from his end. Not evasive, just considered. I did. Camera. Yes. Adrian. I know. Was that the first time you've said it out loud? He was quiet for a moment. And then, to 60,000 people, yes. To myself, no, not by a long shot. His voice was low and certain. I love you, Hannah. I've loved you longer than I knew what to call it. And I am done letting that be something I only say to myself. She pressed the phone against her ear. Her kitchen was quiet. The plant on the windowsill had not just survived. It had grown 3 new leaves since she'd started nursing it back in October. She thought about that. About things that grew slowly and quietly. And then one day you looked up, and they were simply undeniably there. I love you too, she said. Not because he had said it, not because he had stood up for her publicly, but because she had been walking toward those 3 words for 24 years and had finally run out of reasons to stop. He exhaled. That slow, controlled breath of a man releasing something he'd been holding too long. Say it again, he said quietly. She smiled. I love you, Adrian Cole. You hovering attentive drives, 4 hours on a Saturday quotes, my own advice. Back to me absolute. He laughed, sudden and full. The real laugh. The one she had been collecting for 31 years. There it is, she said softly. There what is. The laugh. The one you only do when you forget to control it. A pause. You've been paying attention. I have always been paying attention, she said. I was just too careful to admit it. Outside her window, Springdale continued at its ordinary pace. The streetlight came on in her driveway. The neighbor's dog barked once. Somewhere down the block, a child was still playing after dark, the sound of it carrying through the early spring air, a child's voice, high and bright, and completely unaware of the weight of the adult world. Hannah put her hand on her stomach, still barely showing, still mostly private, this small new life they had made between them. But not entirely private anymore. Not hidden. Not something to be ashamed of, or explained or defended in a principal's office. Real. Theirs. Already stubbornly loved. I have a parent meeting on Thursday, she said. I know. I'll be there. Adrian, you don't have to. Thursday, he said. Final. Nope. She smiled and didn't argue, because some battles she was learning were not worth winning, and some people she was finally allowing herself to understand were not asking to be needed. They were simply and completely there, the way he had always been there, the way he would always be. The parent meeting on Thursday was not what Hannah expected. She had prepared herself for the version she'd been living for the past 2 weeks. The careful faces, the polite distance, the questions that weren't really questions. She had put on the navy dress again, the one she wore when she needed to feel like she could hold her ground. And she had arrived 8 minutes early and arranged the chairs in a circle the way she always did, because circles were democratic. And she refused to stand at the front of any room in her life, like someone being evaluated. Adrian arrived at 7:15, 2 minutes before the parents, and the first thing he did was move one of the chairs so it was directly beside hers, and sit down in it like it was the most natural thing in the world. She looked at him. He looked back. What? He said. You're sitting in the parent section. I am a parent, he said simply, and opened the small notebook he'd brought, which he held with the particular focused energy of a man who had attended 1,000 meetings and intended to pay full attention to this one. She turned away before he could see her face. The parents filed in. 11 of them, the full attendance, which was unusual. Hannah typically got 6 or 7, she noticed. She did not comment on it. The meeting opened the way all her meetings opened. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about where the class was in the curriculum. She asked if there were questions about the spring projects. For the first 20 minutes, it was entirely ordinary. She watched people watch. Adrian watched them recalibrate. Watched the slow adjustment happening in real time across the room as the man from the video sat in a second-grade parent circle with a notebook and listened to a conversation about spelling assessments with complete, genuine attention. It was David Calloway who broke first. He had twin boys, Noah and Eli, who sat in the first row and competed loudly for Hannah's attention every single day, which she found exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. His wife, Patrice, had sent the text, "We owe you an apology." Hannah had not responded to it yet because she hadn't known what to say. David cleared his throat. "Miss Brooks." He paused. "I want to say something that's not about the curriculum, if that's okay." Hannah looked at him steadily. "Go ahead, David." He glanced at his wife. Patrice gave him the specific look that wives give husbands when they have agreed on something, and the husband is taking too long to do it. "We owe you an apology," he said. "My wife sent you a message, but I wanted to say it in person." He looked around the circle briefly, and Hannah understood he was speaking for more than just himself. "Some of us were quick to have opinions about your situation. without knowing the full picture. And that wasn't fair. He paused. You've taken care of our kids for years. You've gone above and beyond every single time. And we repaid that by talking about you in ways we wouldn't want our kids to know about. So, he stopped. I'm sorry. The room was quiet. Hannah took a breath. She had prepared several responses to several possible versions of this meeting, and none of them felt right anymore. So she set them all aside and said the honest thing. Thank you, she said. I mean that. It takes something real to say that in a room full of people. She looked around the circle. I want you to know that I understand how this looked from the outside. I know this town. I know how quickly a story takes shape when the person it's about isn't in the room to tell it themselves. A pause. What I have with Adrian is not what was being described. It is not a transaction. It is not a performance. It is a man and a woman who have known each other for 24 years and who are having a baby that was made from love, even if the path to it was unconventional. She felt Adrian beside her, completely still, completely present. I am not asking anyone to fully understand it. I'm just asking you to give my child the same grace you give your own. Another silence. And then Patrice Calloway said quietly, They're going to be lucky kids to have you as a mother. Hannah pressed her lips together, held it. Thank you, she said for the second time that evening, and meant it even more. After the parents left, she and Adrian sat alone in the circle of chairs in the empty classroom, and she put her face in her hands and breathed for a moment, not because she was falling apart, but because she had been holding herself at a very specific tension for a very long time, and she needed to let it down. He put his hand on her back, said nothing. Let her breathe. When she looked up, he said, You were extraordinary. I was honest. Same thing. For you, at least. She looked at the circle of small chairs around them, the worn spots on the seats, the crayon marks on the backs, the scale of them designed for 7-year-old bodies, evidence of the tiny, specific lives she had spent 6 years caring for. I don't want to lose this, she said quietly. This job, these kids. You won't. You don't know that. You're right. I don't. He turned to face her fully. But Garner's not moving against you. The complaints have stopped. And 20 minutes ago, 12 parents watched you handle the hardest kind of moment with more integrity than most people manage in a lifetime. He held her gaze. The tide is turning, Hannah. You did that. We did that. He accepted that with a small nod. We did that. Spring came slowly to Springdale, the way spring came to most of Virginia, tentative, and then sudden cold mornings giving way to afternoons that smelled like cut grass, and something new beginning. Hannah was 4 months along now, and beginning to show the fact of the baby becoming visible in a way she had thought would make her self-conscious, but actually made her feel unexpectedly like herself in some complete and final way she hadn't had access to before. She moved differently, stood differently. Something that had been perpetually braced in her was releasing slowly like a muscle that finally trusted it didn't need to carry the weight anymore. Adrian came to Springdale every weekend, not always with ceremony. Sometimes he arrived Saturday morning, and they simply spent 2 days doing ordinary things. Groceries, long walks, her showing him the school garden her students had planted him, pointing out with characteristic directness that 3 of the tomato plants were in the wrong amount of sun. She told him they were 7. He said that was not a defense of incorrect horticultural placement. She threw a gardening glove at him, and he caught it without looking up. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that built quietly and permanently the structure of a life. He had begun talking about space. Not abstractly specifically, in the way he approached all practical problems with research and clear-eyed assessment. He had looked at properties outside the city places that were close enough to Manhattan that he could maintain his work, but far enough that there was actual ground under the house and actual quiet at night. Places where a child could grow up with both things, access and air. He brought it up on a Saturday in April while they were sitting on her small balcony with coffee, the kind of morning that came out perfect 2 or 3 times a spring, and then was gone. I want to show you something, he said and held out his phone. She took it. A real estate listing. A house not enormous, not the kind of glass and steel structure she'd half expected from him, but a proper house, white-clapboard big front porch, set back from a quiet road on a half-acre of actual yard. 40 minutes from the city. 3 bedrooms. A room on the second floor with a window that faced east. She looked at it for a long time. "It's beautiful," she said carefully. "I want your opinion. Not your polite opinion. Your actual one." She looked at the listing again. "It has a porch. I know. You have never in your adult life expressed any preference for a porch." "I've never had someone worth sitting on a porch with." He said it simply the way he said most true things. "I looked at 12 properties. That was the one that felt like somewhere you'd actually want to be. Not somewhere designed to impress." She handed the phone back. "You thought about what I would want when you were looking." "I thought about us," he said. "Which includes what you would want. Yes." She looked out from the balcony at the Springdale Street, below the familiar houses, the familiar trees, just coming back into leaf, the neighbor's dog, doing his morning patrol of the fence line. She had lived here for 6 years, and it had been enough. It had been on its best days good. But it had also been small in the way that a life lived carefully was always a little small, contained, managed, safe. She thought about the plant on her windowsill that had grown 3 new leaves. "Could I keep teaching?" she said. "Somewhere near there." "There are 3 elementary schools within 15 minutes, he said. And she understood from the precision of that answer that he had already looked. Of course he had. "Adrian." "I know. It's a lot at once. I'm not asking you to decide anything today." "I know you're not." She paused. "I think I want to." He went still. "Move," she clarified, as if he'd misunderstood. "I think I want to. Not because of the house, though the porch is genuinely excellent. Because—" She stopped, organized it. "I have been still in this town for 6 years. I have been careful my whole life, and I keep waiting to feel like the ground under my feet is solid enough to move. And I think what I've finally figured out is that the ground only feels solid when you're actually walking on it. Standing still doesn't make it safer. It just makes you feel safer." She paused. "Does that make sense?" "Every word of it," he said quietly. "I want to walk on the ground with you," she said, and her voice was simple and unhurried, and meant completely. "I want to build the thing, whatever it is, all of it. The house, the child, the ordinary Saturdays with the bad coffee, and the incorrect tomato plants. All of it." He set his coffee down. He turned toward her fully and looked at her with that specific attention she had come to understand was not something he gave easily, or widely, that look that meant she was the only thing in his vision. "Are you sure?" he said. "I'm terrified," she said. "That's not the same as unsure." He leaned forward and took her face in both hands the way he had 3 times in their entire history, when something was too important for anything but complete contact. And he said, "You are the bravest person I have ever known, Hannah Brooks. And I have known you for 24 years. She put her hands over his. "You're going to make me cry." "You cried at a 7-year-old's book report." "Oh, that was different." "It really wasn't." She laughed wet-eyed, and he pressed his forehead against hers, and they sat like that on the small balcony above the Springdale Street, while the spring morning continued around them, perfect and brief and entirely real. It was a Tuesday evening in late May when he proposed, and like almost everything between them, it was nothing like what the world might have expected, and exactly like them. They were in Manhattan. She had come up for a checkup 22 weeks now. The baby clearly a baby, and no longer a possibility or a plan, but an actual being with measurable weight and visible features on a sonogram screen that Adrian had stared at for so long. The technician had gently said he was welcome to take a photo. He had taken 4. After the appointment, they had walked. The city was warm, and they were not tired. And there was no car waiting, because Adrian had wanted to walk, which was unusual for him, and she had noticed it, but not said anything. They walked along the river as the sun went low over New Jersey, and the light came across the water the way it did on those specific late May evenings that made even people who hated cities admit that cities had their moments. He stopped walking. She walked 2 more steps before she realized it and turned around. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not nervous, Adrian was not precisely nervous, but open, more open than she had ever seen him in 31 years. All the careful management he used in every other area of his life was simply absent, and what was underneath it was just him unguarded looking at her, like she was the fixed point on his compass, and she always had been. "Hannah," he said. "Adrian." She heard something in his voice. Her heart rate changed. He took one hand out of his pocket. In it, between his fingers, was a ring. Not an announcement of a ring, not a box, not ceremony, just the ring itself held simply the way he held everything important, directly, without performance. She looked at it. Small and precise, and completely beautiful, a single stone, not enormous, set in gold, so warm it looked almost antique. Not the ring of a man trying to impress. The ring of a man who had thought carefully about what she would actually want. "I have been in love with you," he said, "for longer than I have understood what love was. I told myself it was friendship, because friendship was survivable, and love was a risk I couldn't calculate. And then you walked into that restaurant in November and sat across from me and listened to the most audacious thing I have ever asked of anyone. And instead of leaving, you said you needed time. And I thought that is exactly who she is. She doesn't run. She thinks and she prays and she decides. And when she decides, she means it completely." He paused. "I want to mean something that completely. To you. For whatever time I have." His voice was steady. "Marry me. Not because of the baby. Not because of the house or the plans or any of the practical things. Because I want to walk through the rest of my life with you. Because every version of my future I can imagine that feels real, you are in it." He paused again, and then quietly, with the particular honesty that had always been the most specific thing about him. "Because I am a better man when you are paying attention." Hannah looked at the ring, looked at the river, looked at this man who had sat on her porch steps at age 7 when no one asked him to, who had written letters on actual paper and kept hers for 24 years, who had learned to cook when he was alone, and drove 4 hours on Saturdays and attended parent meetings with a notebook, and moved one chair over so he could be beside her. She thought about the question she'd been asking herself since November. Was their friendship always meant to become something more? She understood now, standing on the river walk in the last of the May light, that she had been asking the wrong question. It was never friendship becoming something. It had always been the whole thing. The friendship and the love and the loyalty and the 24 years of letters and porch steps and phone calls at 6 in the morning. It had always been one thing, one complete and irreducible thing, and she had simply been too careful to see its whole shape at once. She stepped forward. She put her hand out. He slid the ring onto her finger, and she felt the cool of it and the weight of it, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she said, "You are also a better man when you stop hovering." He laughed, the real one, the sudden one, and pulled her in, and she went, and the city moved around them in its relentless and beautiful way. And she pressed her face against his chest and felt his hand on the back of her head, and thought, there is no safer place in the world. There never was. "Yes," she said into his jacket. He pulled back slightly. "Was that the actual answer? You knew the answer before you asked the question." "I did," he admitted. "I still needed to hear it." "Yes," she said again clearly. "Yes, Adrian, absolutely yes." He kissed her there on the river walk in plain sight while the city went on around them. And she let him fully and without reservation, which was the most radical thing Hannah Brooks had done in 31 years of careful living. They called her mother that night. Her mother went quietly, beautifully, briefly speechless, which was unprecedented, and then said, "I want to speak to him." Adrian took the phone and spoke to her mother for 20 minutes in the kitchen, while Hannah sat on his couch with her feet up and the sonogram photos on the coffee table and his jacket over her shoulders, because she'd gotten cold and it was nearest, and she could hear his voice from the kitchen, serious and warm, and she heard him laugh once at something her mother said, and she thought, this is what it was always going to look like. She called Dee next. Dee's response was immediate and unambiguous. Finally, I have been waiting for this since 2019 when you told me it was complicated. Complicated. I want you to remember that you said complicated. I remember. You owe me so much. I want to be a bridesmaid. Dee, I have strong opinions about flowers, and I will not be silenced on this. Hannah laughed until her eyes watered. Adrian came back from the kitchen and looked at her with the relaxed, unguarded expression she was beginning to understand was the version of him that existed only when every performance requirement was gone. And he said, Dee, she wants flowers. She can have whatever she wants, he said, sitting beside her. Within reason. She has no concept of reason when it comes to events. Neither do I when it comes to you, he said simply and took her hand, and she felt the ring against his palm and thought, I am going to spend the rest of my life with this man. This stubborn, attentive, hovering notebook carrying 4 hours on a Saturday man. The thought was not terrifying. It was the first completely unfrightening thought she had had in a very long time. Outside Manhattan did what Manhattan did. Loud, luminous, relentless. But in that apartment on that particular evening, with the sonogram photos on the table, and the ring new on her finger, and the baby moving for the first time in a way she felt clearly, like a small hello from a person who was already entirely real in there, it was the specific and irreplaceable quiet of two people who had finally stopped explaining themselves to each other and had simply, at last, come home. The house closed on a Friday in July, and the first thing Adrian did when they walked through the front door with the keys was open every window. Hannah stood in the center of the empty living room and listened to the sound of it, the particular acoustic of a house with nothing in it yet, every room waiting, every corner holding its breath. She had moved out of her Springdale apartment 3 weeks earlier. She had packed 6 years of careful living into 14 boxes and a borrowed pickup truck. And when she handed back the keys to her landlord, she had expected to feel grief, or nostalgia, or at least the specific melancholy of closing a chapter. Instead, she had felt something clean and forward-facing and entirely new. Adrian came back from the last window and stood beside her in the empty room. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. "It's smaller than I remembered. It's exactly the same size it was when we looked at it 4 times. I was optimistic. You're always optimistic about space. You have a distorted relationship with square footage because you've lived in a penthouse for a decade." He looked at her sideways. "Are you already criticizing the house we just purchased together? I'm contextualizing your spatial perception." "That is the most teacher sentence I have ever heard." She laughed, and the laugh went up into the empty ceiling and came back down, and she thought, "This is the first sound this house has heard from us. This is the beginning of all the sounds it will hold." She put her hand on her stomach. 7 months now, unmistakable, the baby, carrying low in the particular way that made strangers feel licensed to make predictions. And she said quietly to the room, and to Adrian, and to no one in particular, "We're going to be happy here." He put his arm around her from behind, both hands resting over hers on the curve of her stomach, his chin at her temple. "Yes," he said, "we are." They moved in the following weekend with the help of a moving company that Adrian had hired, and Dee, who arrived in a truck of her own, bearing a casserole dish, 3 strong opinions about furniture placement, and the kind of chaotic, loving energy that Hannah had spent 6 years relying on. Dee walked through every room at full speed, opening closet doors and testing light switches, and evaluating the east-facing window in the second bedroom. The one they had already agreed was the nursery, with the intensity of an architect reviewing load-bearing walls. "This room," Dee said, stopping in the doorway of the nursery with her hands on her hips, "is perfect." "The light comes in from the east," Hannah said. "Morning light. He'll wake up to that every day." Dee turned and looked at her with an expression that was doing several things at once. Affection, vindication, something old and soft underneath all of it. "You're going to be an unbelievable mother, you know that," Hannah said. "I'm going to make every mistake in the book." "Obviously. That's not what I said." Dee crossed the room and hugged her the real kind, the kind that communicated the full weight of a friendship. "I said unbelievable. Those are different things."
Adrian appeared in the doorway holding a flat, packed box with the focus honest expression of a man who had never assembled furniture in his life, but had committed to doing it correctly. He looked at both of them. "Are you crying?" "No," they said in unison. He looked at the box. "This appears to require a hex wrench." "Where would one obtain a hex wrench?" "There's a toolkit in the third box by the door," Hannah said. "The one labeled Tools, which I labeled specifically, so this question would never need to be asked." "I missed that one." "Clearly." He disappeared back down the hall. Dee looked at Hannah. "He assembled 4 companies from nothing, but he can't find the labeled box. He is remarkably specific about where his competence applies. And yet you love him." "Entirely," Hannah said simply, and the word settled in the room with the morning light and the new paint smell and the future they were about to fill this house with. The nursery came together over 2 weekends.
Not professionally decorated. Not the curated magazine-ready version that Hannah had seen in pictures, and that she suspected Adrian could have arranged with a single phone call. They did it themselves, which meant it took longer, and went slightly wrong in places, and was therefore completely right in every way that mattered. Adrian painted one wall the wrong shade of blue on the first try and stood back and looked at it, with his arms crossed, and said, "That is not the color in the photo." Hannah said, "No, it's better." He looked at her like she was being diplomatic. She said, "Adrian, I teach 7-year-olds. I know what a good blue looks like." He looked at the wall again. "It is a good blue," he said, and she could tell he was genuinely reconsidering, and she loved him for it. They argued about the name for 3 weeks, not bitterly in the way 2 people argued when they both cared about the same thing and had different certainties about it. Adrian wanted something strong and clean, 1 syllable or 2. Nothing that could be easily diminished by a school playground. Hannah wanted something with meaning behind it, something that came from somewhere. They went through a list one evening in the kitchen, reading names aloud. Hannah with her tea and Adrian with coffee, scoring each one on a mutual rubric that neither of them had formally established, but both seemed to understand. "Elliot," Adrian said. She considered it. "Elliot," a pause. "Say the last name after it." "Elliot James Cole." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression, the slow, searching quality she had when she was finding the truth of something rather than just its surface. "Where does James come from?" "My grandfather," he said. "He died when I was 9. He was the steadiest person I knew when I was young, before things got complicated." He said it plainly, the way he said things that cost him something. He was the kind of man who showed up. "Like you always say I do." She looked at him across the kitchen. "Elliot James," she said again. "You like it." "I love it." She paused. "I love where it comes from." He nodded once, with the quietness of someone receiving something they didn't expect to feel as much as they did. He looked down at his coffee cup and then back up at her. "My grandfather would have liked you. Would he? He had a specific respect for people who said what they meant and meant what they said." A pause. "You are the most precisely honest person I have ever met." "That's either a compliment or a warning." "Both," he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted, and she thought again what she thought regularly now, without embarrassment or qualification. "I love this man. I love all the specific, exasperating, remarkable parts of him." "Elliot James," she said, finalizing it. "Elliot James," he confirmed. And just like that, their son had a name 3 weeks before he had a face. The last weeks of August were the waiting kind, the particular wait of time when something enormous is imminent, and the days stretched strangely too full and too slow at once. Hannah had stopped teaching for the summer and spent her time in the new house and in her own thoughts, preparing in the internal way she had always prepared for things that mattered quietly, carefully, honestly. She had good days and hard ones. The hard ones were not dramatic. They were small. A morning when fear came in low and early before she was awake enough to reason with it. An afternoon when the size of what she was walking into felt less like a door and more like a cliff edge. She had learned not to manage these moments silently anymore, which was the most significant change in her in 6 months of loving Adrian openly. She told him when the fear came. Every time. He never minimized it. He never problem-solved it. He just said, "I know." and sat with her in it until it passed, and she had come to understand that this specific willingness to remain in someone's difficulty without flinching was the most intimate thing a person could do. Elliot James Cole arrived on a Thursday morning in early September, and he arrived without patience or ceremony, which Hannah would later say was the first indication of his personality. She'd been awake since 4. She had woken Adrian at 4:15, and he had been vertical and clear-headed in under a minute, in the way that still impressed her even after months of living with him. He drove to the hospital with both hands on the wheel and spoke to her calmly through every minute of it, and she gripped his hand in the waiting area, and in the corridor, and in the room where everything became very loud and very real, and at no point in any of it did he look afraid. She asked him once between contractions, "Are you scared?" He looked at her directly. "Completely," he said. "But you're doing the hard part, so I don't get to show it." She almost laughed. Almost. The timing was not ideal. Elliot arrived at 7:42 in the morning, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, healthy and loud, which the nurses said was an excellent sign, and which Adrian said looking slightly overwhelmed for the first time in Hannah's memory was also somewhat terrifying. They put the baby in his arms almost immediately, and Adrian went completely still. Hannah watched him from where she lay exhausted in the specific and total way that she had been warned about and had not understood until now, and saw his face do something she had never seen it do in 31 years of knowing him. All the careful architecture of his expression simply dissolved. The management, the control, the competence, all of it released, and what was underneath was something completely unguarded, and enormous a feeling, too large for his face to contain, moving through him openly. His eyes were wet. He wasn't bothering to address that. He looked down at the baby, and the baby made the unfocused, searching movements of a person newly arrived in a world full of too much sensation, and Adrian said very quietly to the child in his arms, "Hey, I'm your dad." Hannah pressed her lips together hard. He looked up at her, and she saw in his face every year of what they were, the porch steps, and the letters, and the clinic waiting room, and the restaurant in November, and the rainy night in February, and the river walk in May, and every morning in the new house, and all the ordinary, extraordinary days that had made this specific moment possible. "Hannah," he said. "I know," she said. I know." He looked back down at Elliot. The baby had stopped the searching movements, and had gone still in a way that was not sleep, but something more like recognition, the specific calm of a person who has found something they needed. His small fist was closed around nothing. His face was turned toward Adrian's chest. "He trusts you already," Hannah said softly. Adrian looked up. "How do you know?" He went still. "Babies go still when they feel safe." She paused. "You do the same thing, actually." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I do not." "You absolutely do. You go very still when you feel safe. I noticed it in November. In the restaurant when I stopped arguing and just listened, you went completely still." He considered this. "I was not aware of that." "I know. That's what made it real." He looked at her across the small hospital room, across their son, their life, the whole of what they had built from a whispered question over a candlelit table. And he said simply, and finally, and with the completeness of a man who had run out of reasons to hold anything back, "I love you, Hannah." "I love you," she said. "Both of you. All of this." He came and sat on the edge of the bed beside her, the baby between them. And she leaned into his shoulder, and he pressed his lips to the top of her head. And they stayed like that, the three of them, in the particular quiet of a morning that had just become the first morning of a life neither of them had known. 5 months earlier, they were brave enough to build. Her mother came that afternoon, and her face when she held Elliot for the first time was the face of a woman seeing something come full circle, her daughter, who had waited so carefully for so long, finally holding the thing she had been moving toward without knowing it. She held the baby for 20 minutes and did not say much, which was how her mother showed love, and Hannah understood every word of it. Dee arrived at 4, with flowers in 3 colors, and strong opinions about the blanket situation, and a card that said, on the front, I knew it was complicated, and on the inside, thank God you were wrong. Hannah laughed so hard the nurse came to check on her. That evening, after the visitors had gone, and the room had gone quiet, and the hospital had settled into its nighttime rhythm, Hannah sat in the bed with Elliot against her chest, and watched Adrian in the chair by the window. He had his notebook open, the same notebook he'd brought to the parent meeting in March, and he was writing something. She watched him without saying anything. He felt her watching and looked up. "What are you writing?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A letter." She understood immediately. To him, for when he's older, whenever he needs it. He looked down at the notebook and then back up at her. "Someone taught me a long time ago that you write the things you mean on actual paper, because paper is more honest than anything else." She felt the warmth of that move through her 24 years of actual paper, folded and creased, and kept in a shoebox at the back of a closet, every one of them more true than any message sent at speed. She looked at the small face against her chest, already learning to breathe in the long, even rhythm of a person settling into rest. "Tell him," she said quietly, "that the most important thing is showing up, not saying the right thing, not having the right answer, just being there. When someone needs a fixed point." Adrian wrote it down. She watched his hand move across the page in the cramped, careful handwriting she had known since they were 12 years old. "What else?" he said without looking up. "Tell him that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something matters more than the fear does." He wrote that too. "And tell him." She stopped, looked at the window, the first stars visible above the parking structure, the ordinary sky above an ordinary September evening in an extraordinary life. Tell him his parents were best friends first, and that everything that matters in his life will be built the same way. On trust, before anything else. Adrian set the pen down. He looked at her, the whole of her, the way he looked when he was not managing any of it, the way he had looked on the Riverwalk with the ring in his hand. "That's the best thing you've ever said." "I've said a lot of good things." "You have," he agreed. "That's the best one." She looked down at Elliot. He was asleep now, fully and completely the sleep of someone new to the world, and already somehow at home in it. Months later, people would ask how they got there, how a quiet elementary school teacher and a Manhattan billionaire had arrived at a white clapboard house on a half-acre lot, at a nursery with a good blue wall and a morning window, at a son named after a steady man who showed up. Some people asked with genuine curiosity. Some asked the way people asked when they were still looking for the scandal beneath the story. Hannah always gave the same answer because it was the true one. She said, "We were best friends for 24 years. And then one night, he asked me to be brave. And I decided to be." It was not the whole story. The whole story was letters in a shoebox, and a restaurant in November, and a rainy night in February, and a Riverwalk in May, and a church pew on a Sunday morning, and a circle of parent chairs in an elementary school classroom, and a woman learning slowly that standing still was not the same as being safe, but it was the heart of it. And the heart was enough. Because the quiet teacher and the powerful billionaire had never been living separate lives, moving toward a collision. They had always been walking the same road, patient, faithful, sometimes lost, sometimes afraid toward a single destination neither of them could name until they were standing in it. A home filled with morning light and the sound of a child who trusted completely. A love built not on perfection, not on wealth, not on any plan either of them had made, but on 24 years of truth, on the specific bravery of two people who had finally stopped calling things by the wrong name, and on the simple, absolute certainty that had been true since they were 7 years old, and would be true for every year that followed. They were better together than they had ever been alone. And they were never going to be alone again.